Spiritual Christianity, collected from the theological works of Emanuel Swedenborg. Chapter 7. Point number 117. It is said of the whole of nature, and not of a part only, that it is a theatre which represents the Lord's kingdom. On this truth, the spiritual explication of the Holy Scripture rests. For both the Old and the New Testaments consist either of the narratives of events which occurred in nature, or of images taken from nature, or of conclusions which the natural mind draws from the appearances of truth in nature. And the unfolding of these, which from their purely natural character are called mere correspondencies, would be nothing more than an ingenious device, unless they had their causes in the spiritual world of thought and affection, and from that world were brought forth into the representative faculties of men. For man, it is said, has both a spiritual and natural world, his internal man or mind being his spiritual world, and his external man or mind his natural world. And between these there is such a correspondency that the one is represented in the other. These are the declarations of him who could search into nature and interiorly perceive and know that, quote, there is not a single thing in the animal, vegetable, or mineral kingdoms which does not represent some state or other of the spiritual world, or which has not in that world of thought and affection something to which it corresponds. End quote. And yet, if by the light of science only, and not by that of spiritual reason, we look abroad to examine the phenomena of the natural world, nothing can appear more certain than that they are regulated by laws which are independent of the mental condition of men, taken either in the aggregate or individually, and that so far from their standing in relation of effects to the world of mind, there are comparatively but few things in which any dependency of the one upon the other can be directly traced, and still fewer in which the relation of cause and of effect can be seen. Point number 118. The discoveries in astronomical science have led to the conclusion that the motions of the planetary bodies upon their axes and around the central sun are obedient to one law, invariable and universal, called the law of periodicity, in agreement with which the same phenomena are reproduced in the same order at equal intervals of time. If this be so, and there be actually no external variations whatever consonant with any internal mutations of state, it shuts out the possibility of the science of correspondencies, because the whole of nature can no longer be a theatre which represents the Lord's kingdom and the changes which that interior mental kingdom is continually undergoing. Whatever be the state of the Church, and by the Church no particular congregations are meant, united by certain forms of external worship, but the condition of the human mind, considered in the aggregate as to the manner and measure of its reception or its rejection of the love and wisdom which inflow from the Lord. So whatever be its spiritual condition, whether it be one of purity or of corruption, the earth, which is supposed to correspond to man in his natural state of life, still preserves the same axis of rotation, the same average through varying rate of velocity in its passage through space, has the same ellipse for its orbit, and this is equally true of the other planets. In agreement with the law of periodicity, day succeeds to night and night to day, and the relative lengths of day and night in every part of the globe are determined by a law as fixed and as certain as that which determines its varying distance from the sun and the varying rates of its velocity in different parts of its orbit. In all these variations there is a uniformity and harmony of change, and beyond the limits prescribed by the law they do not wander. Point number 119. Were this uniformity of change as strict as it is here laid down, and were there no forces existing to disturb these and other periodic mutations, then it would be impossible to find in these revolving bodies the representative images of the state of the Church. For it enters into the constitution of every finite mind that it is continually and yet by slow degrees changing in the measure and the manner of its recipiency, and that along with such changes it is changing also in its affinity to other minds. This, which is strictly true of the individual mind, is equally so of the associated minds. Associated as well as individual forms of mind have, it is true, their periodical recurrencies of state, and yet there is not, nor can there be, any absolute sameness in the recurrence. If then there be a real correspondency between the Lord's kingdom and man and these great phenomenal changes in nature, the law of periodicity cannot be a strict law, but must admit of a multitude of continually varying exceptions, so much so as to be rather the expression of what would be the fact, were there no forces existing to disturb the regularity of planetary motions than what is actually observed or can be observed in nature. And such is the fact, for there are forces continually in action to disturb the regularity of their elliptical orbits around the Sun, and to interfere with the exact recurrence of their periodic changes. These disturbing forces consist in a power, supposed to be inherent in matter, and therefore in all planetary bodies, of attracting, and by their attraction of deflecting each other from the exact path of their orbits. By the indefinite variety of their relative positions, these disturbing forces are continually varying in their intensity and direction, and hence the perturbations of their orbits are so various that notwithstanding that the general law of their revolutions is preserved, no one revolution of a planetary body can, in its orbit, be exactly alike in any other revolution of the same body. Each planet, whether primary or secondary, has a power within itself of drawing every other planet in the system towards itself and of being attracted by every other. Being spheres of a nearly perfect figure, they gravitate towards each other directly according to their masses and inversely to the square of their distance, or nearly so. If there were only one planet revolving around the Sun, all the motions of that one planet would have a periodical exactitude. The same phenomena would be continually reproduced in the same order at equal intervals of time. The path of its orbit would be a perfect ellipse, and the plane at which it moved a perfect plane. But let there be a second planet added to this supposed system, and forthwith the attraction of this would deflect the former planet from its orbit, and in turn be drawn by it. The ellipses in which they both moved would not be perfect ellipses, and supposing them not to move in the same plane, they would neither of them move in a perfect plane. If this representative truth be extended to a system consisting, like our own, of several planets, the conclusion will be that they are subject to a multitude of minute perturbations, various in their amount and in their direction, so that not one can move in an exact ellipse, nor in a perfect plane, nor in the same plane in any two revolutions. Observation has confirmed this and has shown that the law of periodicity is the expression of a mathematical law, and is not applicable to the sensuous phenomena of the universe. It follows then that notwithstanding the central power of the Sun, which limits and controls these aberrations, the vast and complicated solar system is a theatre which, in the varying relations of its planetary bodies, may represent those changes of state in the kingdom or church of the Lord, which are determined by changes of spiritual affinity, or by changes in the state of those collected spheres, of which the planets should be the representative images. In a more enlightened age, man will possibly have an insight into their correspondency, and may read the states of the universal church in the varying paths of the planets, or be able rationally to unfold the phenomena of perturbations and to connect them with their spiritual causes. Point number 120. But still there are countless phenomena which seem to contradict forcibly the position that the whole of nature can be a theatre on which the Lord's kingdom of heavenly love and truth, or its opposite, is represented. For what relation, it may be asked, can there be between the external aspect of a country and the internal character of its inhabitants? What more common than to behold the most fertile and beautiful country, and at the same time the minds of its inhabitants sterile and uncultivated? And on the other hand, are not mental light and cultivation of a higher order to be found in ungenial climates, and where the face of nature represents nothing of the beautiful or the magnificent, to charm and delight those minds which could best appreciate such scenes as are in harmony with themselves? In what way is it possible to connect the phenomena of earthquakes, of volcanoes, and of storms on the land and ocean with the internal condition of those who suffer by their destructive violence? How can any pestilent disease which sweeps over the surface of the earth represent the different states of many individuals, both good and bad, whom it hurries into eternity? And indeed, how is it possible to reconcile the assumed universality of correspondencies with the many circumstances of man's life, which seem to be of so purely accidental a character as to not depend in the least, either directly or indirectly, even upon his want of prudence? Is it meant by this universal law of correspondency to deny the possibility of accidents? If so, then it is certain that correspondency has stubborn facts to overcome. It has to combat a whole host of events which, to all appearances, depend not upon ourselves and our own actions, but wholly upon others, who may be strangers at once both to ourselves and to our concerns. Point number 121. These and many other such objections as these might fairly be urged against the assumed universality of correspondencies, and it is certain that they will require a profound examination before such an answer can be given as ought to satisfy an inquiring mind. It is not a light thing to demonstrate the truth of correspondency in reference to the natural world. Here, the representative images are of mixed kinds, frequently so involved as to require a clearer insight and a nicer discrimination by an enlightened reason than what man can at present exercise so as completely to disentangle them. Besides all this, how little is known concerning spiritual spheres of life, and yet they are the producing causes of all the events which pass under the name of accidents, and until these in their conflicting operations upon the natural mind be understood, every attempt to show the universality of correspondencies on the theatre of nature would be fruitless. Nevertheless, it will be found upon examining the constitution of the natural world, not by its own deceptive glimmer, but by the collecting light of those spiritual truths which are found in the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg, that there is a sufficient store at our command from which other truths of an equally convincing kind may be evolved, until at length the whole plan of correspondencies as respects the natural world shall stand revealed in a distinct form, though possibly but in an outline to our perception. But the present inquiry is of a less intricate kind, being limited to correspondencies in the spiritual world, where, by the separation of good from evil, truth from falsehood, and by their conflicting spheres ceasing to operate on the mind, the objects of the senses, in the consistency of their images, are the representatives of such distinct and separated states. Here all is comparatively easy. The images are the representative signs either of good or evil, true or false, but not of both. There is no intermixture of images. The succession of objects to whatever sense presented is in perfect keeping with the state of associated minds, and there are no conflicting spheres which seemingly disturb the truth and consistency of representation. On the representative stage of nature, by the conflict of spheres, all things appear confused and intricate, and yet notwithstanding these intricacies and this confusion, which in some instances seem to sweep away all trace of correspondency, it exists as much in the natural world as in the spiritual. The great, the universal law of creation is the same in both. But there are not the same powers of perception in both, neither are there the same facilities in both for comprehending the volume of the outward world which is set before the senses. In heaven, that volume is written in so fair, so legible a hand, that the import of every word can be discovered. Here, the difficulty of deciphering it arises partly from the want of the skill in the examiners, and partly from the intermixture of the images, but not from any intrinsic difference in the works themselves. So the characters impressed upon the books are as much the effects of spiritual or mental causes in one world as in the other. Time and space are as much outbursts of the thought in nature as in that world, in heaven, where everything, even as to their very bodies, is perceived to be spiritual. Point number 122. It has been shown that in the spiritual world there is neither space nor time, nor any perception of their separate existence. For although to the sentient faculties they present the same appearance as they do to men in nature, that angels are able, by their superior illustration of their minds, to correct the appearance of an actual externity, and to think uniformly and spontaneously in the causes of such external phenomena as are present to their sentient faculties. And they are able to do so without in the least interfering with or weakening the force of the seeming externity. In addition to this, it has been shown that the mind itself is the seat of all the objects of sense, that in the mind they are created by the presence of the divine life, and that being the effects, they are therefore the representative signs of the relative states of those minds, by whose medium they are created. And point number 123. But in case the foregoing facts and observations be not sufficient to convince the natural man, who at best cannot without difficulty keep his mind free from the fallacies of space and time, it is presumed that the following facts will convince everyone who is disposed to admit the truth of the experience that the phenomena of space and time can be nowhere but in the mind, where alone their causes are to be found, and that they cannot, without a manifest absurdity, be referred to an external space or time as the sources from which, by a physical influx, they are derived.